The traditional left-to-right political spectrum is accepted by most people. But as a method of categorizing different views, is it really up to the job? By adding a second continuum, and splitting them into social and economic, the overly simplistic spectrum becomes a much more useful compass. The economic scale is usually presented as socialism to capitalism, but both terms have so many different meanings that they only serve to confuse matters. We can simplify this by focusing on the scale of government, ranging from totalitarianism to anarchy. The social scale is usually presented as libertarian to authoritarian. But the level of state intervention says nothing about social attitudes. For the sake of clarity, I prefer a liberal to sectarian scale, with social attitudes ranging from open and egalitarian to closed and discriminatory. Before I move on, I'll address the political hot potato that is, fascism. It is economically left, statist, but socially far-right, xenophobic. If you identify yourself as left-leaning, you may prefer to see the chart rotated to show the social scale as left to right. Alternative versions show this as a continuous circle, with far left and far right intrinsically linked. I actually think that it's more of a triangle personally, but for now, let's get back to the grid. The traditional left-right runs from bottom left to top right, representing varying degrees of social and economic equality. But perhaps the scale from top left to bottom right, representing varying degrees of liberty, is just as valid. So why is the orthodox left-right divide focused on equality rather than liberty? Socio-cultural evolutionary lag. In the past, survival of the fittest dominated Western politics, with state intervention presented as the alternative. Imperialistic social attitudes were a legacy of the British Empire. Liberalism could only be achieved with more state intervention. Totalitarianism could have steered us to either the far right or far left, while a laissez-faire approach could only maintain social inequality. As a capitalist nation, state interference is only accepted in exchange for greater equality. So fascism is off the table too. As social attitudes change, a hypothetical stateless society would be more liberal today than it would have been in the past. Economic inequality is no longer linked with social inequality. Economic and social liberty are no longer mutually exclusive. Legislation to regulate social attitudes is inefficient. So capitalism has no left-right bias on the social scale. To put all this into perspective, this is approximately where various countries currently sit on the scale. So when we talk about our own political persuasions, we tend to ignore the extremes. And when we look at UK politics today, we only need to consider a moderate section of the spectrum. From nationalism to liberalism and from democratic socialism to neoliberal capitalism. So, where do the main UK parties sit on this grid? Conservatives are economically right, and follow average social attitudes to ensure electability. UKIP believe that EU rules are impeding our prosperity. Some Tories agree, so a referendum will be called. Lib Dems think that liberal values should come before economic concerns. Cameron agrees that equal opportunity is essential, but not through restrictive legislation. Greens want to end world poverty and address environmental issues by increasing taxes. Tories argue that we pay more than our fair share in foreign aid and have no intention of asking taxpayers to give more. The SNP want Scotland to be independent. After voting no in the referendum though, they are being offered devolved powers instead. Labour have shifted to the left. They want a more equal society, but we don't know whether they'd intend to increase taxes or defer it to the next generation by increasing borrowing just yet though. The Tories believe that the long-term effect of either is to reduce living standards and increase absolute poverty. So, anyone that is both socially and economically left-wing, will see all Tories as being right-wing on all issues. From their perspective, socially liberal Tories are still too sectarian, because they put their libertarian economic principles first. Many see themselves as both liberal and skeptical towards the state, myself included. But while racism, sexism, and even anti-affluence remain in our discourse, legislation is required to restrict behavior. In the past, any attempt to move directly from imperial capitalism to libertarian communism have failed. Government intervention was required, and the resulting dystopia ultimately led to the return of capitalism. The route to libertarian communism is not through revolution, but evolution. Using the carrot, not the stick. Just as atheism allows us to take responsibility for our actions, so too does the absence of a bloated state.